Well, I was expecting a little bit more, Bloom.
Yeah. Yeah, and we may still get some more. There's still another shoe to drop, or at least something that is going to be worth talking about once Bill Belichick, Robert Kraft, somebody makes a decision.
Let's get some more.
You got a team, here's a word of the wise. You want to dominate your league? Go to football, guys.
Football, I'm living in a fantasy. Football, got everybody mad at me. Football, cause every game I had to win. Football, I gotta be a champion. Football, I'm living in a fantasy.
The coaching carousel is a spinning, and honestly, I thought it would be spun a little bit more, but we're
Hmm.
here. Arthur Smith in Atlanta, done. As far as the Dennis Allen thing, I know we don't do a Week 18 recap, Bloom, but
Yeah.
just stop him if you don't like it, right? Arthur Smith losing his mind. Doesn't matter. Arthur Blank decided to move on, and that may be the best landing spot for any of these coaches, especially if Justin Fields goes to Atlanta. Bloom, that's an exciting time.
Yeah, it is, Cease. And I think that one of the things we're going to watch here is wow, they did this at midnight. That's a little interesting. Arthur Blank saying he's in charge of the decision. He's going to bring in Rich McKay, the CEO. So Terry Fontenot, this isn't one of those situations where the GM gets to make the call. But Cease, I think we can say he was given enough chances with this roster. They got out of cap hell, and you weren't able to win this division. I think the other question that's going to be interesting to watch is whether they keep Ryan Nielsen because the defense vastly improved. It wasn't the defense that was the reason they didn't make the playoffs this year. And a lot of the players, I think, are going to go to bat for him. So I do think that there's a lot of ins and outs here. And this is one of the more straightforward coaching vacancies because a lot of things are in place. They need a quarterback and maybe just a new attitude.
And a new start in our nation's capital in Washington. The Commanders now looking for, well, a little bit of everything, Bloom. So we'll see what Raheem Morris, I believe, has already been requested to get a head coaching interview there. So just going over that. They also have Mike McDonald, right? That didn't take long. Mike McDonald requested to interview for the Commanders head coaching vacancy there as well. Also, a general manager vacancy we can talk about. But speaking of just new direction, now under new ownership, it's the Washington Commanders, and the Washington Commanders are going to, clean house. Of course, that's what they did. They're cleaning house. Bloom's going to be right back, everybody. And well, they've cleaned house and moved on. So let me change a few things here and we'll get that going. How about that? And how about that? Here we go. It's a live show, everybody. So, yeah, the Commanders moving on from Ron Rivera. Nobody should be surprised by that. I feel bad for Eric Bieniemy. I feel bad in that situation where you look at it now, you go, okay, what's on the horizon? Because everything's going to be brand new in Washington. Bloom, are you back? Give me the thumbs up. Are you back? You're back? You're back? Okay, you're back. More housekeeping? Literal housekeeping?
Exactly. Appointment times, and sometimes time shift around. But what's shifting around in Washington is an ownership that people are going to want to be associated with. So if we want to give Ron Rivera credit for something in his Washington tenure, is he oversaw the transition from the Daniel Snyder era to the Josh Harris era. And this is also a team that has an opening at head of football operations. So they're going to be interviewing there. They bring in Rick Spielman. Rick Spielman, maybe a little cocoony there, but they also, on the opposite side, bring in Bob Myers, Cecil, a basketball mind. And since sometimes we have conversations that skirt on the idea of football and the relevance of other sports in football, this was a kind of out of the box move. I know that the Browns brought in, I think, a baseball mind during all the different ideas that they were trying. But what do you think about Washington bringing in one of the architects of the Golden State dynasty in basketball to help them pick whoever's going to lead their organization for the future?
It's a results-based business. I mean, I don't have enough calories to burn and be like, "It's an awful idea." I think it's interesting, right? And how many times the NFL is a good old boy network. It's all fuddy-duddy. It's all, "We've always done it this way." That's why Arthur Smith loses his mind when Dennis Allen keeps scoring. It's like, "Well, you can't do that. That's the code." F your code. Sorry,
Yeah.
Joe. Like, and
Yeah.
F any sort of way of like, "This, we've never done this before." Well, maybe it'll work. It's a results-based business, and my God, you've been so down for so long.
Right.
When was our last Super Bowl? Mark Schlereth, right?
Right.
1991. That was the last Super Bowl.
Right. I mean,
It's
there's the
been a minute.
Robert Griffin moment, the RG3 moment. But yeah, and I think that honestly, at this point, Cease, we should applaud just about any new idea, no matter what you say. It's a results-based business, but even being open to new ideas, I think is, again, it symbolizes where Washington is at. They have the number 2 pick, so this is a really attractive job. We've seen a lot of articles ranking the attractiveness of the jobs.
Right.
This one's pretty good because you're going to get to put your stamp on this franchise. And as much as we didn't like the Montez Sweat and Chase Young trades, at least it gives the next coach more say in how these resources are going to be allocated. So you're not going to be committing to big contracts for players that the previous coach did pick. So I do think that this is one where we have to be open to Washington going in a new direction. And we haven't seen anything from Josh Harris that indicates that he's going to go down a David Tepper path. So I think actually Washington fans should be optimistic. It's been a long time since we said that.
Yeah, a long time. Long time since we've said, I'm being sarcastic, the Raiders should keep their interim head coach. But they should. They didn't keep Rich Bisaccia. Do they keep Antonio Pierce? Does Mark Davis figure it out? Because all of those, I know 2 things from week 18. Well, I know more, Bloom, that I'm not allowed to say. Anyway, the 2 things are the Raiders players love Antonio Pierce and the Raiders fans hate Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, I think that, this was the Josh McDaniels, Jimmy Garoppolo gambit failure, and you did see the players play for Antonio Pierce. And it's interesting, the fork in the road here. I can't remember who I saw put it out there weeks ago that basically the Raiders head coach decision is going to come down to Antonio Pierce or Jim Harbaugh. Congratulations, Michigan Wolverines. I heard some of the boomers in Ann Arbor stayed up past midnight last night. Cease. It was a celebration. And to Jim Harbaugh, he's been there, done that now. Some say the greatest Michigan program, the greatest team. He's accomplished that. He's gotten to that mountaintop. What's next for him? You could tie him to any number of jobs, but I think it makes most sense. The Raiders organization, Mark Davis, that's the kind of move that would appeal to him. But like you said, Cease, you can look back at the Rich Bisaccia mistake. Well, it would have been a better hire than Josh McDaniels, but they also need to hire a GM. And I think one of the other interesting things to watch here, if you're into organizational chart stuff, is how these teams are going to go about this, right? Because when you have a GM and head coach vacancy, some might want to hire the GM first and let the GM run the head coach search. Some might have, like Arthur Blank is saying, I'm the one that hires the head coach, not the general manager. And I think that whether the Raiders take the first step of hiring a general manager, and just touching on that real quickly, Champ Kelly is the interim general manager. So wouldn't that be elegant, right? Just remove the interim tags from the head coach and the general manager and say, we had some good momentum going here and let's keep that going. Or here's some names you're going to hear come up a lot. Okay. Ed Dodds from the Colts. He's a name that a lot of teams are going to want as a potential general manager. And Adam Peters. And I think any team would be happy to associate themselves with what San Francisco has done during the Kyle Shanahan era. So let's watch the order of this. Let's watch, are they going to go big, or are they going to start the slow build that started in the second half of the year? They're going to carry that over. And, for Raiders fans, like you said, Cease, they're used to this.
I'm not saying Champ Kelly and Adam Peters are the same, but you're getting good stock, regardless of whichever one you get as a general manager. I hope both of them do, but I know this about Adam, who is incredible, an incredible man and an incredible evaluator. He wants all the power, and he will be able to pick his spot. He will be able to choose where he goes. When fans have suggested, like, well, the Broncos fired George Payton, they haven't yet. I always think it's funny, Bloom, and I commented on this on Twitter. The most important thing ever. I said when the Tom Pelissero report comes out, and we love Tom. Tom's an Audible alum, longtime friend of the show. But the Tom Pelissero report comes out saying George Paton is likely safe with the Broncos. So I tweeted, George Paton reports that George Paton is likely safe with the Broncos. It's not that simple. Maybe he is. Maybe in May he'll not be safe. But we know that George Paton talks to Tom Pelissero. Greg Penner talks to Adam Schefter. So Tom Pelissero talks to George Paton. But when fans have asked, like, would they fire Paton and replace him with Adam Peters? I know this. Peters wouldn't come to Denver again or come back to Denver, Bloom, because he wants all the power.
Yeah, and I think that this is definitely one of those situations where, like we said, Game of Thrones kind of stuff within these organizations. And certainly recently, we can look at Joe Douglas, Howie Roseman, I think is another good example here, where GMs have figured out how to insulate themselves from the failure of the team, right? George Paton has not done that. George Paton has absolutely not done that. We shouldn't assume an arrangement there where George Paton has some sort of imperial power, especially with new ownership. So I think you're right. We'll bring up New England before we sign off today. There are some to be continued situations here.
Yeah, certainly to be continued. What in the hell do we do with Carolina? Because Dave Tepper's still there. Okay, and I'm sorry, Panthers fans. I'm sorry. It should be better. You have a lousy owner, allegedly, or what I have to say. Scott Fitterer was fired as a general manager on Monday. We already know they were looking for a new head coach, someone to reclaim Bryce Young or do something, or I don't know. We talk about the good jobs, right? Ranking the attractiveness of the jobs. Carolina's got to be pretty low on this list.
Well, and Cecil brings up Ben Johnson, for instance. Let's just throw Ben Johnson out there as one of those names, or any hot name. And I think that you are seeing a little bit of a shift in the thinking of, it used to be, we probably said this, I'm sure I said this at one point on one of our coaching carousel shows or more, that when you get offered an NFL head coaching job, you take it, right? If you have a chance, you take it. The road to NFL head coaching jobs is littered with names who were a hot name for one cycle, didn't get hired, and were never a hot name again, right? But I think you're seeing a shift now to some of these assistant coaches who are trying to pick the next step in their career, knowing that it isn't always a net positive. And you do have to wonder in this, because have you seen the list of who they're interviewing for GM and head coach? I mean, it's easier to say who's not on the list, me and you, basically, and that doesn't, I don't see clarity. I don't see any kind of organizational ethos. I just see David Tepper firing people and throwing money at problems and expecting that's going to fix it. So I think you're absolutely right, Cease, to say this is such an unattractive job. And let me say this, whatever we thought about it last year, because we didn't think it was an attractive job last year, really. You still had Scott Fitterer, you still had David Tepper, you still had a lot of things around this. When Frank Reich was hired, we thought, well, that's pretty good. He has some success. He's an offensive mind. He's been around for a long time. Okay, but we didn't say, wow, Carolina zeroed in on their guy and they got their guy. Like, that was who they were able to get, right? This is the same thing whenever they hired Ben McAdoo as offensive coordinator 2 years ago. So there's a pattern here, and it gets worse every cycle. So you have to wonder, it's whenever we hear whoever the head coach and the GM is, for that matter, is it a sign that they have a new direction and they have an idea of what went wrong and how to fix it? Or is it just, this is who would take the job?
This is what they've got. And we know owners, I believe it was you, Bloom. I'm sorry. I do a lot of shows. Who was like, when Tepper threw the drink on the fans and the league fined him, it's like the league doesn't like that.
No. Well, and but the thing is, see, we're going to pull back the curtain now. This is the Q Lance Zierlein saying, you don't want to know how the sausage is made. Just eat the sausage, enjoy the sausage, right?
Yeah. Right.
But, the NFL is a loose coalition. It's a cartel of 32 owners, and they have some, the Dan Snyder talk, or Jerry Jones, they do have some freedom to act in their own interests instead of the league's interests. And yeah, the owners are going to send a message that they don't want that kind of negative publicity. But in the end, they're not really able, well, I shouldn't say they're not really able to hold them accountable, because we did see actually this. How did David Tepper end up being the owner of the Panthers? Let's tell that story. Not a happy story. So the NFL, I mean, now we're like 0.001% along the way to how we got here with the Panthers. But you're right to watch that the league is sending a message that, hey, you're representing us too. You're representing the Shield. And I think that in some ways, Tepper is reaping what he has sown, because this is a job that, as a coach, it might set your career back instead of setting it forward. Because again, now without a first round pick this year, without a second round pick next year, with the quarterback at number one, look, it's not Josh Rosen levels of panic, but certainly this isn't what you expected. What's the pitch here other than you might not get a chance to be an NFL head coach unless you take this opportunity? And if you're one of the hot names, you probably shouldn't be thinking of it that way.
Jim Harbaugh is going to end up in the AFC West, and I think he's going to end up with the Chargers. Back to San Diego, where he started his coaching career with the Toreros, where some guy named Josh Johnson, friend of the show, was his quarterback. So the Chargers are there. Herbert, Harbaugh. It would be staring at two things that it's a Broncos show that the Broncos wanted, because Elway really liked Justin Herbert, but he was afraid to take a first round pick because Paxton Lynch sucked. And Greg Penner, his first choice was Jim Harbaugh. His second choice was D'Amico Ryans. Sean Payton was, third, fourth, fifth, something like that. So yeah, staring at your neighbor's yard, Bloom. That's what the Broncos are going to be doing if the Chargers get Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, and this is one where maybe the Chargers can luck into, and we'll see in the end if Harbaugh ends up taking this job, and if it's a good thing to hire Jim Harbaugh, for that matter. But certainly his track record with San Francisco and Michigan, for that matter, points in the right direction. And this is one where you have a quarterback. What do all these other jobs have in common? Washington, Vegas, Atlanta, right? Carolina. Do you have a quarterback with Carolina? You have a quarterback here. And it was supposed to be Kellen Moore was going to fix this. It was supposed to be a lot of different acquisitions. At least they have some pieces of an offensive line. At least they have a relatively early pick again. So after Washington, which really gives you like a blank canvas to paint what you want to paint. Well, this one, you see the color palette, and other than the powder blue, you do have Justin Herbert. And I do think one good thing about Justin Herbert is he is more of a passive personality, right? He's not, think like Eli Manning, speaking of the Chargers, a passive personality. So I think that we talk a lot, Cease, about teams taking on the personality of their head coach and their quarterback. And Jim Harbaugh has a pretty big personality, and maybe not not able to accommodate a big personality at quarterback. But maybe this Herbert, other than the alliteration or assonance, or because it's an H at the beginning, I got to go back and look at my English textbooks from high school. It makes sense, not just with H and H, but because you have a dominant head coach and you have a quarterback that'll say, "Tell me what to do, coach."
Couple minutes left in the show, Bloom. New England has yet to make a choice. We'll see about that. Bill Belichick saying, like, I'll give up my GM duties, which is a sign. Also, we have the Wink Martindale stuff.
Yeah.
With Brian Dable being like, we're keeping everybody. And then Wink's like, I'm out of here. And the behind the scenes stuff, which we'll know more in a little bit. Let's just say that. Anyway, let's wrap this thing up with some not yet done talk.
Yeah, with New England, you have to assume that this is a conversation about whether Bill Belichick is willing to allow himself to be traded. I have to assume that. So we're looking at maybe some of these other teams would have to make a decision or decide whether they would be willing to trade draft capital for Bill Belichick. Or Belichick has to decide if he wants to go along with this. But what's funny about this, the stuff writes itself. If he stays, he's going to bring back Josh McDaniels. I know what'll fix it. Tom Brady out of retirement. I don't know. The Giants, and you see how quickly the clock spins in the NFL, right? Last year, Brian Dable, ahead of schedule, winning a playoff game, Daniel Jones, showing everybody they were wrong. This team already is a few steps ahead of where we thought they would be on the rebuilding process. Now you flip this over. Most of the coaching staff is gone, so you can't blame anybody else, Brian Dable. Now you have a quarterback decision to make because you have a high enough pick. This is a rich enough quarterback class that you really have to make a decision, and your career is going to be tied. Well, your career, this job is going to be tied to this decision, whether you stay with Daniel Jones or you take a new quarterback. And you have to think that even if Brian Dable and Shane, if they draft a quarterback in the top 10 this year, does that reset the clock? We used to joke that that's why teams would do it. They want to reset the clock. Now you can't judge me for 3 more years. It doesn't feel that way after the Giants fired with Brian Dable, most of the assistant coaches, including the special teams coach, offensive line coach, a lot of other coaches leaving. Not a great sign. Jacksonville also fired their defensive coordinator. Was the problem the defense this year? Sometimes, but not all the time.
Not all the time. That's right. It is the Audible, footballguys.com, Cecil, Lammey, and Sigmund Bloom. Make sure to help us grow our YouTube channel. Like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss a vid. We appreciate you all for doing that. He's Sig. I'm Cease. We are the Audible. Everyone, thanks for watching. Stay tuned. And would you please stay frosty?